The envelope looked harmless until I saw my own address printed beneath someone else's name, my daughter's. I read the recorded deed twice, then a third time. Sandra Anderson was gone. In its place was Emily Carter, listed as the new owner of the home William and I had spent more than 30 years building together. Then I saw how she had done it. Emily Carter, attorney-in-fact for Sandra Anderson. My daughter had used the power of attorney I gave her to take my house. I reached for my phone. Then I remembered something William once told me. Robert made sure nobody could use that document to help themselves. So instead of calling Emily, I smiled, folded the deed, and made a different call. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If your own child secretly transferred your home into their name, would you confront them immediately or stay quiet until you knew exactly what they were planning? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And while you're there, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you believe family should never use love as an excuse to take away someone's choices, please like this video and subscribe. What happened after that envelope arrived taught me a lesson I never expected to learn from my own daughter. For anyone looking at the house from the street, it probably seemed ordinary. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, white shutters that needed repainting every few years. A modest front porch with enough room for 2 rocking chairs and a little table between them. There was no swimming pool, no marble entryway, no sweeping staircase like the homes people show off in magazines. But to me, that house had never been ordinary. William and I bought it 34 years earlier when Emily was still young enough to fall asleep in the back seat of our station wagon. Back then, William worked as a maintenance supervisor for a manufacturing company outside Tampa, and I was an office manager at a dental clinic. We were comfortable enough to pay our bills, but we counted every dollar. I still remembered standing in that empty living room the first afternoon we got the keys. The carpet was worn. The kitchen cabinets were outdated. One bathroom faucet dripped so steadily that William joked we had purchased a house with its own indoor waterfall. I looked around and worried we had made a terrible mistake. William put his arm around me. "Sandra," he said, "give me 10 years and you won't recognize this place." He was wrong. It took him closer to 20. William was never a man who hired someone if he believed he could learn to do the job himself. He built the bookshelves along the living room wall with his own hands. They were not perfectly straight, although he insisted they were. He replaced the kitchen cabinets one summer, installed new flooring, another year, and spent 3 weekends building the brick patio behind the house. There was an oak tree in the backyard that he planted when Emily was 9. When he brought the tiny sapling home, I laughed. "That little thing is supposed to become a tree." One day, he said, "Digging into the Florida soil, Emily's children will sit under it." Life did not follow every plan we made. Emily never had children. But the oak tree grew. By the time William died, its branches stretched across half the backyard. Every important chapter of our family seemed tied to that house. Emily learned to ride her bicycle in the driveway. She had sleepovers in the bedroom at the end of the hallway. We took pictures beside the fireplace before every Christmas morning. When she was 16, William stood on the porch pretending not to worry while she drove away alone for the first time. When she graduated from high school, we hosted a barbecue in the backyard. When she married Brian, she got dressed for the rehearsal dinner in the same bedroom where I had once tucked blankets around her as a child. There were Thanksgiving dinners when every chair was filled, and Christmas evenings when wrapping paper covered the living room floor. And then there were quieter memories. William, reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. His coffee mug beside mine before sunrise. The sound of him whistling while repairing something that I had begged him to leave alone. Those were the memories that became unbearable after he was gone. William and I were married for 38 years, 3 years before the deed arrived in my mailbox. His heart began failing. At first, We treated it like another problem to manage. Doctor visits, medication schedules, less salt, shorter walks, more rest. William joked with nurses and complained about hospital food. He continued fixing things around the house even when I told him to stop. But eventually, his body stopped cooperating with his stubbornness. During his final months, I became his caregiver. I helped him dress. I organized his medications. Some nights I slept in a chair beside our bed because I was afraid he would need me, and I would not hear him. The morning he died, the house became so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator humming from the bedroom. I had imagined grief many times before experiencing it. I had been wrong about it. Grief was not constant crying. Sometimes grief was making coffee for two people out of habit and standing frozen when you realized what you had done. Sometimes it was reaching for the television remote because William liked the evening news, then remembering nobody was waiting to watch it. Sometimes it was waking at 2 in the morning and thinking for half a second that he was still beside you. Emily became my lifeline during that first year. She called almost every evening. "Did you eat today, Mom?" "Yes." "What did you eat?" That question always made me smile because she knew I might lie about the first one. She drove over on Saturdays with groceries. She helped me change online passwords William had always managed. When the insurance company sent a letter I did not understand, Emily sat at my kitchen table and called them for me. Brian came too sometimes. He trimmed bushes, changed air conditioning filters, carried heavy boxes into the garage. I remember telling one of my friends from the dental office how lucky I was. "I don't know what I would do without Emily," I said. And I meant it. About 18 months after William died, I ended up in the hospital myself. It was nothing dramatic in the end. Florida had been brutally hot that week, and I had spent too much time gardening without drinking enough water. My blood pressure dropped, I became dizzy in the grocery store, and the next thing I knew, I was staring at fluorescent hospital lights. Emily was terrified. She arrived before the doctor had even finished examining me. "You scared me to death," she said. "I'm fine." "You fainted in Publix. I prefer to call it an unexpected nap." She did not laugh. A few days later, sitting at my kitchen table, she brought up the idea of a durable power of attorney. "What if something worse happens next time?" she asked. Emily, I'm not saying something will happen. I'm saying we should be prepared." Her reasoning sounded responsible. If I were hospitalized again, someone might need to pay bills, speak with insurance companies, or handle financial matters temporarily. And Emily was my only child. Who else would I choose? So we scheduled an appointment with Robert Hayes. Robert had handled legal matters for William and me for years. He had helped update our wills, review beneficiary designations, and organize our estate documents after William first developed heart problems. His office was in a low brick building, shaded by palm trees 15 minutes from my house. I remember sitting across from him while Emily sat beside me. Robert went through the power of attorney carefully. He explained what Emily could do. He explained what she could not do. At the time, I barely listened to the limitations. Why would I? This was Emily, my daughter. The child whose fever I had checked at midnight. The teenager whose college applications I helped proofread. The woman who had held my hand beside William's hospital bed. Robert paused at one section. "William was very particular about this provision," he said. I looked up. William Robert nodded. "We discussed safeguards when you two updated your estate plan." Emily smiled lightly. "That sounds like Dad." It did. William trusted people, but he trusted paperwork more. Robert tapped the page with his pen. "There are certain transactions that require additional authority. I want both of you to understand that." I waved my hand gently. "Robert, Emily isn't going to steal from me." Emily laughed. "Thanks, Mom." Even Robert smiled, but his expression turned serious again. "Good documents aren't written because we expect people to do something wrong. They're written because circumstances change. I signed anyway. Before I left, Robert handed me a copy of everything. I placed it inside William's old filing cabinet when I got home, and for more than a year, I barely thought about it. What I did remember was something William had once said after one of those meetings. He had been standing in the kitchen sorting paperwork while I teased him about how cautious he was. He looked over his glasses at me. Good paperwork isn't about distrusting family, Sandra. Then he tapped the folder. It's about making sure money never gets the chance to change them. At the time, I thought my husband was simply being William. Careful. Practical. Maybe a little too suspicious of human nature. Years later, sitting alone with a deed that no longer carried my name, I finally understood why he had insisted on those protections. And by then, money had already begun changing someone I loved. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go. For a while, I told myself I was imagining the change in Emily. Grief had made me more sensitive. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. After William died, I had become accustomed to Emily helping me with things I once handled alongside my husband. She knew the passwords to several household accounts. She knew which insurance company covered the house and when the property taxes were due. She knew where I kept the important documents. None of that bothered me at first. In fact, I was grateful. If a letter arrived from the insurance company, Emily would say, "Give it to me, Mom. I'll take care of it." If I complained about a confusing medical bill, she would open her laptop at my kitchen table and handle it before I could finish my coffee. "You don't need to worry about all this anymore," she often told me. At first, those words sounded loving. Eventually, they began to sound like instructions. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Emily sitting at the table with several of my bank statements spread in front of her. "What are you doing?" I asked. She barely looked up. "Just checking something." "What your monthly expenses?" I pulled out the chair across from her. "Why?" She sighed in the way adults sometimes sigh at children who have asked too many questions. "Because you're spending more than you need to." I stared at her. "I'm paying my own bills." "I know. My pension covers my expenses. I have savings." "I know that too." "Then what exactly are you checking?" Emily finally looked at me. "Mom, I'm trying to make sure everything is organized." That word became one of her favorites. Organized. Everything she wanted to control was suddenly something that needed to be organized. My insurance needed organizing. My retirement accounts needed organizing. My household expenses needed organizing. Even my grocery spending apparently needed organizing after she discovered I had bought an expensive bottle of olive oil. "You paid $23 for this," she asked once, holding it up like evidence in a criminal trial. "It was on sale. That makes it worse." I laughed. Emily did not. She put the bottle back in the cabinet and said, "You need to start thinking long-term." I remember feeling irritated, but I let it go. She was my daughter. She worried. That was what I kept telling myself. Then she started calling my house something different. The first time, I barely noticed it. We were sitting in the living room when she said, "We should probably have someone look at our roof before hurricane season." I glanced up. "Our roof?" She smiled. "You know what I mean." "Your roof." I laughed with her. A week later, she did it again. "We really need to figure out what our insurance costs are going to look like next year." Then again, "If we ever sell our house, we should update the kitchen first." That time, I corrected her. "My house." Emily blinked. "What, you said our house?" "Oh, Mom." She gave me a tired smile. "It's just a figure of speech." Maybe it was, but once I noticed it, I began hearing it everywhere. Our finances, our plans, our options, our house. I told myself not to become suspicious of my own child over pronouns. Then Brian started taking an unusual interest in the property. Brian Carter had always been charming when he wanted to be. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave 20 minutes later knowing everyone's name. That quality helped him in real estate investing. He did not work as a traditional agent. He bought rental properties, partnered with investors, renovated houses, and talked constantly about equity leverage and opportunity. William had liked him well enough, although he never fully trusted his appetite for risk. Brian thinks every dollar should be working harder than the person who earned it, William once told me. After William died, Brian's questions became more specific. One Sunday afternoon, he stood in my backyard, looking at the oak tree. "You know what houses are selling for around here now?" he asked. "No. You'd be shocked. I probably would." He looked back toward the house. "You still own it free and clear, right?" Something about the question made me uncomfortable. "Yes." "No mortgage at all?" "No." He whistled softly. "Sandra, you're sitting on a lot of equity." I folded my arms. "I'm sitting on a patio." He laughed. I did not. Later that evening, Emily began talking about senior communities. Not nursing homes, she was quick to clarify. Independent living mom. Beautiful apartments. Pools. Activities. People your age. People my age live everywhere. You know what I mean. "I'm 68, Emily." "Not 98. She frowned. "That isn't what I'm saying. I still drive." "I know. I cook. I know. I take care of the house." "You hire someone for the lawn." "Your father hired someone for the lawn, too." "Was he ready for senior living?" Brian looked down at his plate to hide a smile. Emily did not find it funny. "You're alone in this house," she said. There it was. Not concern. A conclusion. "I like this house. It's too much house for one person." "According to whom?" "According to common sense." I felt something tighten inside me. For 38 years, William and I had made decisions together. Now my daughter was speaking as though my preferences were evidence that I did not understand what was best for me. I put down my fork. "I'm not selling." Nobody had actually said the word selling yet. That was what made the silence afterward so revealing. Brian glanced at Emily. Emily looked at me. Finally, she said, "Nobody said you had to." "Good. We're just discussing options." "I'm not." Her jaw tightened. That evening ended awkwardly, but they did not stop. Emily sent me links to condos. Brian mentioned property values. Emily showed me brochures for communities with names like Harbor Oaks and Magnolia Terrace. Every conversation had the same message underneath it. You should leave. They just had not said why. Then one afternoon in late April, I found out there was more going on than concern about my future. I had been outside watering the flowers near the porch. When I came back inside, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Emily and Brian. I was about to call out when I heard Brian say, "If this isn't handled before June, we're in real trouble." I stopped in the hallway. Emily lowered her voice. "I know. How long are you going to keep waiting?" I said. "I know, Brian. We don't have another 3 months." My hand tightened around the watering can. There was anger in Brian's voice. Not fear for me, fear for themselves. I stepped into the kitchen. Both of them went silent. Emily turned quickly. "Mom, I thought you were outside." "I was." Brian reached for his coffee. I looked from one of them to the other. "What has to be handled before June?" Neither answered immediately. Then Emily smiled. Too quickly. "Nothing you need to worry about. I heard Brian say you were in real trouble." Brian cleared his throat. "It's business stuff." "What kind of business stuff?" "One of my investments," he said. "Timing issue. That's all." Emily stood and began gathering papers from the table. We don't want you worrying about our problems. The irony of that sentence would stay with me for months. At the time, I simply nodded. But as Emily picked up the last sheet, I noticed something written across the top. It disappeared into her folder before I could read more than 3 words. Estimated property value. I looked toward Brian, then toward my daughter. Neither of them met my eyes. That was the first moment I understood that whatever deadline they were facing had something to do with money. And somehow, I had the growing feeling that they had already decided my house was part of the solution. After that afternoon in the kitchen, I started paying closer attention to the papers Emily brought into my house. Not because I believed my daughter was capable of stealing from me. I still wasn't ready to think that way. But once you hear someone discussing your home in the same breath as a financial deadline, little things stop feeling little. A week later, Emily arrived carrying a thick blue folder. She placed it on the kitchen table before she even took off her sunglasses. I brought a few things we need to clean up, she said. She gave me a look. You know what I mean, Mom? That phrase again. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. Emily opened the folder and began pulling out documents. This one is about your homeowner's insurance. This is your property tax information. There's something about your homestead exemption, and I printed a few estate records Robert's office may want updated. She moved through them quickly, putting small yellow tabs beside signature lines. It reminded me of my years managing the dental office. Patients would sometimes sign insurance forms without reading a word because someone pointed to the bottom and said, "Sign here." I had never been one of those people. William used to tease me about it. Sandra could read the terms and conditions on a toaster, he once joked. And he was probably right. I reached for the first document. Emily immediately said, "You don't have to read all of it." I looked over the top of my glasses. I always read what I sign. I know, but these are routine. If they're routine, reading them shouldn't be a problem. She leaned and exhaled. I noticed it. That small flash of impatience. It vanished almost immediately. Fine, she said. Take your time. So I did. The first 2 documents were harmless enough. One involved an insurance renewal. Another concerned contact information. The third was less clear. It referred to Property Records Estate Administration and authority to act regarding real estate. I read the first page, then the second. Emily began tapping one fingernail against the table. What exactly is this? I asked. Just estate housekeeping. That doesn't tell me anything. It's part of getting everything organized. There was that word again. I continued reading. The language was dense enough that even with my office experience, I wanted Robert to look at it before I signed. I closed the document. I'm not signing this today. Emily's expression changed. Why? Because I don't understand all of it. You don't need to. Robert already set everything up. Then Robert can explain it. Her mouth tightened. Mom, this is exactly why I'm trying to help you. Because I read paperwork. Because everything becomes difficult. I stared at her. Difficult for whom? She pushed her chair back slightly. For everyone. There was a sharpness in her voice I hadn't heard before. I stayed calm. If a document affects my house or my estate, I'm going to understand it before I sign. Emily rubbed her forehead. Dad handled things for years, and you never questioned every page he put in front of you. That hurt. Not because it was entirely false. William had handled many of our legal and financial matters. But William had also spent 38 years earning my trust. He never rushed me. He never hid papers. He never became angry when I asked a question. I looked directly at Emily. Your father never told me not to read something before signing it. She looked away. Then she laughed bitterly. Unbelievable. What is you trusted Dad with everything? Now I'm trying to help you, and suddenly I'm being treated like some stranger. I didn't say that. You don't have to. Her voice became louder. Why can't you trust me? For a moment, guilt worked exactly the way she intended. I looked at the woman across from me and remembered a little girl with scraped knees running into my arms. I remembered helping her move into her college dorm. I remembered sitting beside her the night she told me Brian had proposed. Trusting Emily had once been as natural as breathing. So why did I suddenly feel as though I needed to protect myself from her? I almost picked up the pen. Almost. Then I looked at the page again. If you want me to sign it, I said quietly. Leave it here. I'll ask Robert about it. Emily stood. No. Before I could respond, she gathered the documents. If you're going to involve an attorney every time I try to help, forget it. Robert is my attorney. I know who Robert is. Then why does it bother you if he reads this? Emily froze for half a second. That was the moment I noticed something I would think about later. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she shoved the papers into the folder. I have enough going on without fighting with you. I'm not fighting. Well, it feels like it. She grabbed her purse. Call me when you decide whether you actually want my help. Then she walked out. The front door shut harder than necessary. I remained at the kitchen table for several minutes. Part of me wanted to call her back and apologize. That was the old instinct. Mothers become so accustomed to repairing hurt feelings that sometimes we apologize even when we are the ones who have been hurt. But I didn't call. 2 weeks passed. Emily still spoke to me, although our conversations became shorter. Then something strange happened. Every year, I received property tax correspondence at the house. I had a folder specifically for it. William had labeled it in his neat handwriting years earlier. Property taxes house. One morning while sorting mail, I realized I hadn't received something I expected. At first, I thought nothing of it. Mail gets delayed, notices change. Government offices make mistakes. Another week passed. Still nothing. So I called the county property office. A woman answered and asked for my name and property address. Sandra Anderson, I said, giving her the address. I heard typing. Then silence. Not long, maybe 3 seconds, but long enough to make me uncomfortable. Ma'am, I said. Yes, I'm just pulling up the parcel. More typing. Then she asked, Are you calling about the recent ownership change? I stopped breathing for a moment. I'm sorry, the ownership change. I didn't make any ownership change. Another silence. This one was longer. The woman's voice became more cautious. Can I verify your full name again? Sandra Louise Anderson. And you previously held title to the property. Previously. My hand tightened around the phone. This is my house. Yes, ma'am. I understand. No, I don't think you do. What ownership change are you talking about? I could hear papers moving on her end. Then she said a deed was recorded recently transferring ownership. The room seemed to tilt. To whom? She hesitated. I would later understand why. Government employees aren't supposed to interpret legal documents for callers. She was simply reading what the public record showed. According to the recorded information, she said the current owner is listed as Emily Carter. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I thought I had misheard her. Emily Carter. Yes, ma'am. That's my daughter. The woman said nothing. I stood up slowly from the kitchen chair. How could she own my house? I'm afraid I can't give legal advice. I can tell you what was recorded. I didn't sell it. I understand. I didn't give it to her. I understand. My voice had started trembling. When was this filed? She gave me the date. It had happened less than 3 weeks earlier. Around the same time, Emily had brought me those papers. Except, I had never signed them. A cold realization moved through me. Whose signature is on the deed? I can't interpret it for you over the phone, but you can obtain a copy of the recorded document. I want one. She explained how I could request a certified copy. I wrote down every instruction. My handwriting looked different by the time I finished. smaller, shakier. Before hanging up, I asked one final question. Are you absolutely certain the name is Emily Carter? The woman checked again. Yes, ma'am. I thanked her. Then I placed the phone on the table. For a long time, I simply sat there. The kitchen around me looked exactly the same. William's old clock still hung over the doorway. Morning sunlight still fell across the counter. Outside, the oak tree moved gently in the wind. Nothing had changed. And yet, according to a government record, everything had. My daughter's name was now attached to the home William and I had spent most of our adult lives paying for. I had refused to sign her papers. Somehow she had done it anyway. The next morning, I requested a certified copy of the deed, and when it finally arrived, I would discover something even more disturbing than seeing Emily's name where mine used to be. She hadn't needed to forge my signature at all. The certified copy arrived 3 days later. I knew what was inside before I opened the envelope, but knowing did not make it easier. I carried it to the kitchen table, the same table where Emily had spread those papers in front of me and told me they were nothing more than estate housekeeping. For several minutes, I just stared at the envelope. Then I opened it. The first thing I saw was the property address. My address. The legal description beneath it matched the lot William and I had bought decades earlier. Then my eyes moved to the section identifying the grantor and grantee. The grantor was listed as me, Sandra Anderson. The grantee was Emily Carter. For a moment, I could not understand how both of those things could be true. I had never signed a deed. I had never sat before a notary. I had never agreed to transfer my house. Then I reached the signature section, and suddenly, I understood. Emily had not forged my name. That would almost have been easier to comprehend. Instead, she had signed her own. Emily Carter, attorney-in-fact, for Sandra Anderson. I read the line twice, then a third time. The betrayal felt colder because it had been done so neatly. There was no shaky imitation of my signature. No crude attempt to pretend she was me. She had used the authority I willingly gave her, the authority I had signed because I trusted her to help me if I was sick. She had turned that trust into a weapon. The deed showed a nominal consideration of $10. $10. I sat back in my chair and stared at that number. William and I had worked for decades to pay off that house. We had skipped vacations. We had driven cars until they practically begged to be retired. We had refinanced once, then spent years paying the balance down. And according to the document in front of me, the home we had built our life around had been handed to my daughter for $10. My hands began to shake. I reached for my phone. This time, I fully intended to call Emily. I wanted to demand an explanation. I wanted to ask her how she could sit in my kitchen, look me in the eyes, and tell me I was imagining things while a deed with her name on it was already sitting in the county records. I found her contact. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then William's voice came back to me, not literally, of course, but grief has a strange way of keeping certain sentences alive. Robert made sure nobody could use that document to help themselves. I lowered the phone. If William had insisted on something in those legal papers, then I needed to understand it before I let Emily know what I had discovered. So I called Robert Hayes instead. His receptionist answered. "This is Sandra Anderson. I need to speak with Robert. Is this regarding your estate documents?" "Yes." I looked at the deed, and I think it's urgent. Robert called me back less than 20 minutes later. "Sandra, Robert, I need you to tell me something." "Of course." "San, Emily used my power of attorney to put my house in her name." There was silence. Not confusion, not surprise, a very controlled kind of silence. "Why are you asking?" "Because she already did." Another pause. Then his tone changed completely. "Do not call her," I gripped the phone tighter. I was about to. Don't. Robert, do not confront Emily. Do not sign anything else. Do not agree to anything about the house. My heart started beating faster. Can you come into the office? Yes. Bring the deed. Bring your copy of the power of attorney if you have it. I do. Good. Come this afternoon. I arrived at his office carrying the blue document folder William had used for years. Seeing it in my hands almost broke me. William had written estate documents across the tab in black marker. Robert met me personally in the reception area. He looked older than I remembered, but the same calmness was there. Sandra. He took my hand. Come in. I placed the deed and power of attorney on his desk. He read the deed first, slowly. Then he opened the power of attorney and began turning pages. I watched his face the entire time. Robert. He held up one finger. Give me a minute. That minute felt like an hour. Finally, he stopped at a section near the middle of the document. Then he looked at me. I need to ask you a very specific question. All right. Did you ever sign a separate authorization allowing Emily to make a gift of your real property to herself? I frowned. No. Think carefully. I am thinking carefully. Did you ever sign an amendment gifting authorization property transfer consent? Or anything specifically allowing Emily to transfer your home to herself? No. He leaned back slightly. Did you ever tell another attorney to prepare one? Absolutely not. Did, Robert? I stopped myself and almost laughed despite everything. You're Robert. For the first time that afternoon, he smiled. Yes, I am. No. You never prepared anything like that for me. His expression became serious again. Good. Good. I stared at him. My daughter transferred my house into her name. How is anything about this good? I don't mean the situation is good. I mean the fact that you never signed such an authorization matters. He turned the power of attorney toward me and pointed to a paragraph. There are limits here. I leaned forward. Robert traced one line with his finger. This document gives Emily broad authority to act on your behalf in certain financial matters. That does not mean she can automatically use your property for her own benefit. I looked at the deed. But she did. She executed a document. Isn't that the same thing? No. That single word changed the air in the room. I stared at him. Explain. Robert folded his hands. A recorded deed can create the appearance of a transfer. But whether Emily had the legal authority to make that transfer is another question. My breathing slowed. For the first time since the county employee had told me Emily's name was on my house, I felt something other than fear. It was small, but it was there. Hope. Robert tapped the power of attorney again. William was very concerned about self-dealing. I swallowed. I remember you saying something about that. He insisted on protections. What protections? Robert looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I would never forget. Sandra, if you never signed a separate authorization, Emily may have used a power she simply did not have. I sat completely still. Does that mean the house is still mine? It means we have grounds to challenge what she did. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then anger returned. Then I'm calling her. Robert shook his head. Not yet. Why not? Because right now, Emily thinks you don't know. I looked at him. And before we show her our hand, I want to know what she intends to do next. A chill moved through me. You think she's planning something else? Robert glanced at the deed. She didn't transfer the house to herself for sentimental reasons. The truth of that statement hit hard. He continued. We need to know whether she plans to sell it, borrow against it, or use it in some other transaction. I thought about Brian, his questions about equity, the senior communities, the deadline before June. And suddenly, everything that had felt disconnected began moving into place. Robert closed the folder. Go home and pretend nothing happened for now. I don't know if I can look at her. You don't have to forgive her. You don't even have to understand her. He met my eyes. But if you want to protect yourself, don't let her know yet that you've discovered the problem. I looked down at William's handwriting on the folder. For years, I had thought his caution was excessive. Sitting there that afternoon, I finally understood. My husband had not been protecting me from the daughter we knew. He had been protecting me from the possibility of who someone might become when desperation and money entered the room. I picked up the folder. When do we start? Robert gave me a measured look. We already have. And for the first time since seeing Emily's name on my deed, I walked out of that office knowing one thing my daughter did not. She thought she had taken my house, but she had made a mistake. Robert did not let me leave his office until I understood exactly what William had done. At first, all I wanted was a simple answer. Was the house still mine or not? But Robert refused to give me the kind of comforting sentence I wanted before explaining why. He pulled the power of attorney back across the desk and turned it to a section buried several pages into the document. This, he said, tapping the paragraph, is what William insisted on. I leaned closer. The language was painfully formal. Legal authority, gifts, transfers, fiduciary duties, self-dealing. I looked at Robert. In English, please. He gave me a faint smile. In English. Emily has substantial authority to help you. She can pay bills, manage certain accounts, deal with insurance, communicate with financial institutions, and handle transactions on your behalf. That's what I thought I gave her. You did. Then how is what she did different? Robert rested his hands on the desk. Because the authority was given for your benefit, Sandra, not hers. That distinction sounded obvious when he said it. Yet somehow, somewhere along the way, Emily had decided otherwise. Robert pointed to one sentence. This provision specifically restricts gifting and transactions that benefit the agent personally. The agent being Emily, yes. So she can pay my electric bill. Yes. She can deal with my insurance. Yes. She could handle something involving my bank if I were in the hospital. Within the authority granted, yes. But she can't give herself my house. Not without additional authority. I stared at the paragraph. What additional authority? A separate written authorization specifically permitting that kind of transfer. And I never signed one. Correct. He paused. That matters enormously. I sat back. For days, I had felt as though someone had quietly erased me from my own life. One document at the county office had made me feel powerless. Now Robert was telling me that the story might not end with that document. Why was this clause there? I asked. He looked at William's old folder. Because of your husband. That answer hurt more than I expected. Robert leaned back and seemed to search his memory. Years ago, when William and I reviewed your estate plan, we discussed what would happen if one of you became unable to manage financial matters. I remember. William asked a lot of questions. I almost laughed. That sounds like him. I wanted to know whether an agent could move money between accounts, whether an agent could sell property, whether an agent could make gifts. Robert smiled slightly. He kept asking what someone could do rather than what we expected them to do. That was William exactly. He was the kind of man who checked the smoke detectors before we went on vacation. The kind who kept photocopies of insurance cards in 2 different places. The kind who read warranty exclusions before buying a washing machine. At the time, I teased him for it. Now I wished I could thank him. Robert continued. I told him that documents can grant broad powers, but broad powers create risks if circumstances change. What did he say? Robert looked at me carefully. He said, I trust my daughter. I just don't believe love should replace safeguards. My throat tightened. For a moment, Robert's office blurred. I turned my face toward the window. William had been gone 3 years, yet suddenly I could see him as clearly as if he were standing beside me. Gray hair that never stayed combed. Reading glasses halfway down his nose. That patient expression he wore whenever I accused him of worrying too much. I swallowed. He really said that. Robert nodded, almost word for word. I looked down at the document again. Did he think Emily might do something like this? No. Robert answered immediately. I don't want you rewriting your memories of him or of your daughter because of what happened now. William was not secretly suspicious of Emily. Then why insist on this? Because he understood something people often forget. Robert folded his hands. Legal protections are most useful before anyone thinks they'll need them. I sat quietly. That sentence stayed with me. William had not predicted betrayal. He had simply refused to build our future on the assumption that people would always behave exactly as expected. And if this clause wasn't here? I asked. Robert's expression became more serious. The situation could be much more complicated. I felt a chill. But it is here. Yes. So, what happens now? We establish exactly what Emily did, what authority she relied upon, and what she plans to do with the property. You already have the deed. I have one piece. What else do you need? We need to determine whether there are other documents, whether she has approached a lender, whether there is a pending sale, whether she has signed anything with a broker or buyer. The word buyer made my stomach tighten. You think she could already be trying to sell it, I don't know. But you think it's possible. I think people generally transfer property to themselves because they intend to control it. I thought about Emily's brochures, the senior communities, Brian's endless questions about equity, that strange deadline before June. What if she has a buyer, then we deal with it? What if she sells before we can stop her? Robert's voice remained calm. That's why I'm telling you not to delay. But it's also why I don't want you acting emotionally. I stood and walked toward the window. I'm her mother, Robert. How am I supposed to act carefully? I turned around. She sat in my kitchen. I know. She asked me why I didn't trust her. I know. She already had my house in her name when she said that. Robert did not try to soften it. That was one thing I appreciated about him. He did not tell me Emily had probably meant well. He did not tell me families make mistakes. He did not ask me to consider how stressed she might have been. He simply allowed the betrayal to be what it was. I want to ask her why I said, "You will," when knowing the answer can no longer hurt your position. I stared at him. He continued. Right now, Emily believes you have no idea what she did. That makes me sick. It also gives you an advantage. I had never thought about having an advantage over my daughter before. Families were not supposed to be battlefields. But Emily had already treated my trust as something she could use against me. Maybe protecting myself did not make me cruel. Maybe it simply meant I had finally accepted the situation I was in. Robert opened another folder. I'm going to start documenting everything. What should I do? Keep copies of every letter. Save messages from Emily and Brian. Write down conversations involving the house. That sounds like I'm building a case against my own child. You're preserving facts. The distinction did not make it hurt less. Before I left, Robert asked for my original power of attorney and made another copy. Then he handed the folder back. Keep this somewhere secure. I will. And Sandra. I stopped at the door. If Emily brings you anything else to sign, don't sign it. I won't. If she asks whether you've spoken with me, what should I say? Robert considered that. You don't have to lie. I almost smiled. That wasn't my question. No, it wasn't. For the first time that afternoon, I saw a little warmth return to his face. Just don't volunteer information. I drove home slowly. When I pulled into the driveway, the late afternoon sun stretched across the front lawn. I sat in the car and looked at the house. William's shutters, William's porch, the roof we had argued about replacing 5 years earlier, the oak tree rising behind everything. For days, I had looked at my home and wondered if it still belonged to me. Now I understood something different. Emily had recorded a deed. But recording a piece of paper did not magically give her every power she believed she possessed. She had overlooked the restriction William insisted on years earlier. And she had no idea I knew. That evening, Emily called. Her name appears on my phone while I was standing in the kitchen. My heart started pounding. I answered. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? I looked at William's estate folder lying on the counter. Yes, I said. Everything's fine. Emily believed me. And that was the moment I realized Robert was right. If I wanted to know what my daughter planned to do with my house, I needed to let her believe her plan was still working. So I said nothing, and I started watching. Pretending I knew nothing was harder than discovering the truth. Once Robert told me to stay quiet, every conversation with Emily became a test of self-control. She called me the next morning. Did you sleep okay, Mom? Yes. Any dizziness? No. Good. I worry about you. Those words nearly broke me. Not because they were cruel, because they sounded exactly like the daughter I had trusted. I stood at the kitchen counter, gripping my coffee mug, and wondered how someone could ask whether I was sleeping well while secretly preparing to take away the home I slept in. But Robert's warning stayed in my head. Do not show your hand. So I answered normally. I'm fine, sweetheart. Emily sounded relieved. Or maybe I only imagined it. Over the next several days, she became attentive again. Too attentive. She dropped off groceries I had not asked for. She reminded me about a dental appointment. She even brought me a lemon pie from the bakery William used to love. If I had not seen the deed, I might have convinced myself that my suspicions were shameful. That was what frightened me most. Manipulation does not always arrive looking like cruelty. Sometimes it brings dessert. The following Saturday, Emily and Brian came over just before noon. Brian carried a tape measure. I noticed it immediately. What's that for? I asked. He looked down at it as though he had forgotten it was in his hand. Oh. Yes, Brian. The measuring tape. He smiled. I wanted to check a few things. What things? Nothing major. Emily stepped between us with a bag of sandwiches. Mom, we brought lunch. The subject changed, but the tape measure did not disappear. After we ate. Brian wandered into the living room. I followed at a distance. He measured the wall beside the built-in shelves, then the width of the front window. What are you doing? I asked. He glanced over his shoulder. Just getting dimensions. For what? He paused. Furniture planning. Whose furniture? That caught him. Emily appeared in the doorway. Mom, Brian is just helping me think through possibilities. What possibilities? Her smile became strained. Future possibilities. There was that vague language again. Future. Options. Planning. Never the truth. I nodded as if the answer satisfied me. Of course. Brian watched me carefully. Then he continued measuring. That afternoon, he checked the guest bedroom, the kitchen, the width of the hallway. He asked me when the roof had last been replaced. 7 years ago, I said. HVAC 4 years, water heater 3. He nodded and typed each answer into his phone. I wanted to ask him why an insurance issue required room dimensions and appliance ages. Instead, I smiled. Anything else? He looked almost embarrassed. No, that should do it. The next visit was worse. Brian arrived before Emily and walked around the outside of the house taking photographs. The front elevation, the driveway, the backyard, the patio. When I stepped onto the porch, he was photographing the living room windows. Brian. He lowered his phone. Hey, Sandra. Why are you taking pictures of my house for insurance? I had spent decades dealing with forms, vendors' policies, and administrative paperwork. I knew what insurance documentation looked like, and I knew what real estate listing photographs looked like. He was not documenting storm damage. There was no damage. He was framing the house, trying to make it look attractive. You need pictures of the flower beds for insurance. He glanced toward the garden. Well, they want an idea of the property condition. The insurance people. Which insurance people? Before he could answer, Emily's car pulled into the driveway. He actually looked relieved. I said nothing more. That evening, I called Robert. They're measuring rooms, I told him, and taking pictures. Yes? What kind? Front, exterior, backyard, kitchen, living room. Robert was quiet. Sounds like preparation. For a sale? Possibly. My chest tightened, even though I had expected the answer. Can you find out? I can check public information and see what else may be happening. But remember, Sandra, don't interfere yet, unless there's an immediate risk. How much more do we need to see enough to understand their objective? I hated how reasonable he sounded. I wanted action. I wanted somebody to march into Emily's house, put the deed in front of her, and force her to explain herself. But anger gives you speed. It does not always give you direction. So I waited. 2 days later, Robert called me. His tone told me immediately that he had found something. Do you know much about Brian's investment business? Only what he talks about. Did you know he and Emily were carrying significant debt? I sat down. No. He appears to have been involved in at least 2 rental property deals that have gone badly. How badly? Bad enough that financial pressure would make sense. Robert explained only what he could confirm. One rental property had undergone expensive repairs and remained vacant longer than expected. Another investment had been purchased with aggressive financing and was now costing more each month than it generated. There were also indications of substantial credit card balances and a bridge loan approaching maturity. I rubbed my forehead. June. What I heard Brian tell Emily they had to handle something before June. That could fit. I closed my eyes. For weeks, I had tried to believe Emily wanted me to move because she was worried about my age. Now the picture looked different. My house was paid off. No mortgage. Years of equity. To Brian, it probably looked less like a home and more like a rescue boat. And Emily had decided they were entitled to climb into it. Robert, I whispered. Was I their plan? He did not answer immediately. I think your property was part of it. I swallowed hard. The distinction offered no comfort. That night, Emily and Brian came for dinner. I almost canceled. Instead, I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, one of William's favorite meals. I needed something familiar around me. During dinner, Brian barely ate. He kept checking his phone. Emily seemed nervous. Finally, she asked, Mom, have you thought any more about downsizing? I cut a piece of chicken. A little. Her face brightened. You have? I nodded. I'm trying to keep an open mind. It was the first deliberately misleading thing I had said to her. The guilt hit immediately. But then I remembered the deed. Emily leaned forward. That's all I'm asking. Brian put down his fork. Could be really good timing, for whom I asked. He froze. I smiled. I mean, with the market. Oh, right. He recovered quickly. Yes, the market. After dinner, I began clearing dishes. Emily and Brian stayed at the table. I carried plates into the kitchen, then stepped into the pantry to put something away. Their voices dropped. They thought I could not hear them. Brian spoke first. How much longer? Emily answered quietly. I'm working on it. We don't have time. I know. Then stop treating this like she has a choice. My body went cold. Emily whispered something I could not catch. Then Brian said more clearly, once it's listed, Mom won't be able to stop us. Mom. He called me that sometimes as a term of affection. That night, hearing it in his mouth made me sick. I stood motionless in the pantry. Then Emily answered. She'll be upset at first. At first, she'll adjust. I closed my eyes. Not cry. Not scream. Adjust. They were discussing the removal of my home as though I were an obstacle in a business plan. A person to be managed afterward. I quietly stepped back into the kitchen and deliberately set a plate down harder than necessary. Their conversation stopped instantly. When I returned to the dining room, Emily smiled. Everything okay? I looked directly at her. For 1 second, I wondered whether she could see it on my face. Whether she could tell that something between us had just died. But I remembered Robert. I remembered William. And I remembered the deed. So I smiled back. Everything's fine. Emily relaxed. Brian reached for his phone again. Neither of them knew I had heard every important word. By then, I no longer had to wonder whether they intended to sell my house. They did. The only question left was how far Emily was willing to go to force me out of it. I got my answer sooner than I expected. The following Tuesday, Emily arrived carrying a glossy brochure. I knew what it was before she placed it on the kitchen table. The cover showed a smiling, silver-haired couple walking beside a swimming pool beneath palm trees. Across the top, in elegant blue letters, were the words, Magnolia Terrace Independent Living. I looked at Emily. What's this? She sat across from me. I found somewhere I think you'd really like. I already like where I live. Her smile tightened. Mom, just look at it. I opened the brochure. There were photographs of bright apartments, a fitness room, landscaped courtyards, restaurant-style dining, and women around my age laughing over cards. It looked pleasant. That was not the point. Emily leaned closer. They have 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. Housekeeping is available. Transportation too. I have a car. I know. And I clean my own house. I know that too. Then why are we discussing housekeeping and transportation? Her expression changed. She had clearly rehearsed this conversation. Because this house is becoming too much for you. I looked around my kitchen. The counters were clean. The floors had been mopped the day before. There were fresh flowers in a glass vase by the window. Based on what the stairs, I use them. The yard. I have someone cut the grass. The repairs. The house is in good condition. You're alone. There it was again. That one fact Emily seemed determined to turn into evidence that I was incapable of living my own life. I'm widowed, I said. That isn't the same thing as helpless. I never called you helpless. You keep talking to me like I need supervision. That's not fair. Neither is deciding I need to move when I've told you I don't want to. Emily pushed the brochure toward me. Just visit the place. No. Mom, I said no. She stared at me. The old Emily might have backed off. She might have sighed, rolled her eyes, and changed the subject. This Emily did not. Instead, she said quietly, It's already arranged. I looked at her. What is the tour? That isn't what you meant. Her eyes flickered. Before she could answer, the front door opened. Brian walked in without knocking. He had started doing that more often lately. Hey, he said as though we were all in the middle of an ordinary family afternoon. Emily looked irritated. You're early. I finished sooner than I expected. His gaze dropped to the brochure. Good. You showed her. I folded my hands on the table. Brian pulled out a chair. Sandra Magnolia Terrace is actually a nice place. I looked at some of the numbers. Of course you did. He ignored the edge in my voice. You'd have no maintenance, no property taxes, no major repair costs. I also wouldn't have my house. You'd have freedom. I almost laughed. Freedom. It was remarkable how often people used that word when they wanted someone else to give something up. I already have freedom. Brian leaned back. But a lot of your money is tied up here. There it was. Not safety. Not stairs. Not companionship. Money. Emily shot him a warning look. I pretended not to notice. What money? Brian hesitated. The equity. My house isn't a bank account. No one said it was. You mention equity every time you come here. That's because it's part of planning. Planning for what? Silence. I looked from Brian to Emily. Neither answered directly. Finally, Emily said, "The housing market is strong right now." I felt my pulse quicken. And if you ever were going to sell, this would be a good time. I'm not selling. If you ever were going to sell, this would be a good time. I'm not selling. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Mom, we've been over this. No. You've been over this? I've been saying the same thing. Brian leaned forward. You have to think practically. I turned toward him. I am thinking practically. I own a paid-off home that I love. Leaving it would make no practical sense to me. He opened his mouth. Emily stopped him. Brian, he sat back. Then she turned toward me. Her voice softened. Mom, I'm worried about you. I studied her face. For one painful second, I wanted to believe her. I understand that I said. Do you? Yes, which is why I'm asking you to respect my answer. Her mouth tightened. You don't understand how quickly things can change. What things? Your health. My doctor says I'm fine. For now. That phrase landed hard. For now. As if turning 68 had placed an expiration date on my judgment. I closed the brochure and pushed it back. I'm not moving. Emily's expression finally cracked. Not into sadness, into frustration. It may not be that simple. The room went still. I looked at her. What did you say? She immediately corrected herself. I mean, sometimes circumstances force decisions. What circumstances? Brian stared at the table. Emily reached for the brochure. The house is too much responsibility. That isn't what you just said. Mom, please. No. You said it may not be that simple. Why her hand remained on the brochure. Neither of us moved. That was when I made a decision. Robert had told me to learn how far Emily intended to go. I had spent days watching, listening, pretending. Now I wanted to give her one last chance to tell me the truth. Not because it would erase what she had done, but because part of me still needed to know whether my daughter could look me in the eye and admit it. I lowered my voice. Emily, is there something you need to tell me about my house? Her face changed, only slightly, but I saw it. Brian looked at her. I waited. This was the moment. She could have confessed. She could have told me about the deed. She could have cried. She could have blamed Brian. She could have said she panicked about money and made a terrible decision. I would have been furious. But at least the truth would have entered the room. Instead, Emily looked directly into my eyes. No. One word. That hurt more than the recorded deed. Because the deed had been signed somewhere else. Behind my back. This lie happened right in front of me. I gave her another chance. Nothing. You're sure? Her voice sharpened. Why are you asking me like that? I studied the woman sitting across from me. My daughter. My only child. And I realized I had finally reached the point where I could no longer explain her choices as panic, misunderstanding, or Brian's influence. Emily knew exactly what she had done, and she was choosing to keep doing it. I leaned back. All right. She seemed surprised. All right, I'll visit Magnolia Terrace. Brian looked up. Emily blinked. Really? Yes. Her entire body relaxed. The transformation was immediate. That's all I wanted, Mom. No, it wasn't. But she thought I believed it when she asked eagerly. Whenever you arranged it. Thursday afternoon. I nodded. Fine. Emily smiled for the first time since she arrived. She began explaining the amenities again. The pool, the dining room, the activities calendar. I barely heard her. I was watching Brian. He had taken out his phone. Under the table, he typed something. A few seconds later, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the message, then at him. A tiny look passed between them. Relief. I understood exactly what my agreement meant to them. They thought I was giving up. They thought getting me through the doors of that senior community was the first step toward getting me out of my house. And for now, I needed them to believe it. So, on Thursday, I toured Magnolia Terrace. I admired the gardens. I complimented the dining room. I listened politely while a cheerful woman named Carol explained the weekly activities. Emily stayed close beside me. Every time I expressed interest in something, her confidence grew. At the end of the tour, she asked, "What do you think? It's lovely?" Her eyes brightened. "I knew you'd like it. I said it was lovely. I didn't say I was moving here." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "We don't have to decide today." That was almost funny. She had already decided months ago. On the drive home, Emily talked about selling furniture I would not need. Which pieces could go into storage? Which family photographs should come with me? She was planning the dismantling of my life while I sat quietly beside her. I looked out the window. By the time we pulled into my driveway, I knew something had shifted inside me. I was no longer waiting for my daughter to do the right thing. I was waiting for her to reveal enough of her plan that she could no longer deny what she had done. Emily parked and smiled at me. "See, this doesn't have to be scary." I opened the car door. "No," I said softly. "It doesn't." She thought I was talking about moving. I wasn't. 3 days later, she called and told me she wanted to bring someone to the house. A friend, she said. But when Linda Matthews stepped out of Emily's car, carrying a leather portfolio and studying my roofline, before she even reached the porch, I knew exactly what kind of friend she was. The realtor had finally arrived. Linda Matthews did not look like the kind of woman who walked into a house without noticing everything. That was my first impression of her. She was probably in her mid-50s, with neatly cut chestnut brown hair, a cream-colored blouse, navy slacks, and low heels sensible enough for walking through properties all day. She carried a structured leather portfolio under one arm and wore the calm expression of someone who had spent years dealing with nervous sellers, demanding buyers, and contracts that could fall apart over a single sentence. Before she reached my front porch, she glanced at the roof, then the windows, then the brickwork around the entry. A realtor. There was no question about it. Emily smiled as she brought her inside. "Mom, this is Linda Matthews. She's a friend of mine." Linda extended her hand. "It's very nice to meet you, Sandra. You too." Her handshake was warm but professional. Emily added quickly, "Linda has a lot of experience with homes in this area. I thought she could give us some ideas." Us. Again. Linda looked at me. "Emily said you might be considering some changes." I noticed the wording. Might be considering. That told me something immediately. Emily had not told Linda the whole truth. If Linda believed I had already agreed to move, she would have said something different. I smiled. "I've certainly heard a lot of ideas lately." Emily gave me a warning glance. Linda either missed it or politely pretended to. "Well," she said, "I'm happy to look around and answer questions. No pressure." No pressure. I almost laughed. There had been nothing but pressure for weeks. Would you like some coffee? I asked. That would be lovely. Emily looked impatient. Maybe we should show her the house first. Linda smiled. There's no rush. That made me like her immediately. I poured 3 cups of coffee while Brian came through the front door several minutes later. He looked surprised to see me sitting comfortably at the table with Linda. Sorry I'm late. No problem, Linda said. Brian shook her hand. Good to finally meet you. Finally. That one word told me they had already spoken. I filed it away mentally. Robert had told me to watch. So I watched. After coffee, Linda opened her portfolio. I usually start by understanding the property and what the owner wants to accomplish. Owner. I looked at Emily. She did not look at me. Linda continued. Then we talk about condition pricing timing and any title issues before getting serious about a listing. Brian leaned forward. Timing is important. I understand. We'd like to move quickly. Linda glanced at him. How quickly, Emily answered. Friday, if possible. My fingers tightened around my coffee cup. It was Tuesday. They wanted my house on the market in 3 days. Linda looked mildly surprised. That is quick. The house is ready, Brian said. Mostly, Emily added. Linda turned toward me. And Sandra, are you comfortable with that timeline? There it was. The first question anyone in that room had asked about what I wanted. Emily answered before I could. Mom is still getting to the idea. Linda's eyes shifted back to me. I smiled gently. I'm learning a great deal. That was true. Emily seemed satisfied enough. Linda stood. Why don't we take a look around? We started in the living room. The moment Linda saw William's built-in bookshelves, she walked toward them. These are beautiful. My husband built them, really, 30 years ago? She ran her fingers lightly along the edge. Craftsmanship like this gives a house character. I swallowed. William had spent 3 weekends building those shelves. On the second weekend, he had cut one board half an inch too short and blamed the measuring tape. I had teased him about it for years. Now a stranger was discussing those shelves as an attractive selling feature. Emily stood behind Linda taking notes on her phone. I looked away. We moved into the kitchen. Linda complimented the cabinets and asked when they had been replaced. William did them about 12 years ago, I said. Brian immediately added, the appliances are newer. Linda nodded. That helps. Then came the dining room, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, the backyard. At each stop, Linda asked practical questions. Roof age, air conditioning system, water heater, flood history, insurance claims. Brian had most of the answers ready. Of course he did. He had already asked me all of them. Standing in this backyard. Linda looked up at the oak tree. That's magnificent. My husband planted it when Emily was 9. Linda smiled at Emily. You grew up here. Emily looked toward the tree. Yes, for one brief moment, something softened in her expression. I wondered if she remembered sitting beneath that tree with William. If she remembered him pushing her on the old tire swing. If she remembered that this house was not simply equity. Then Brian said, the lot size is one of the stronger selling points, and the moment disappeared. When we returned inside, Linda sat at the kitchen table and began making notes. This property should show well, she said. Brian smiled. That's what I thought. Linda looked at me. There are cosmetic things you could do, but nothing I've seen suggests you need major work before listing. Emily leaned forward. What price range are we talking about? Linda gave a preliminary estimate. It was a large number, larger than I expected. Brian's eyes changed when he heard it. It was subtle, but I saw it. Not joy, relief. Money had just become real to him. Emily asked, and if we price competitively, you could attract attention quickly, but I don't promise timelines. We don't need top dollar if that slows things down, Brian said. That sentence made me turn toward him. This was my paid-off house, my largest asset, and Brian was already volunteering to accept less money for a faster sale. Linda noticed my expression. She looked back at Brian. Speed and price are decisions for the owner. Then she asked the question that shifted the atmosphere. Who currently holds title? Emily answered immediately. I do. Linda looked at her. You own the property? Yes. I lifted my cup and took a slow sip of coffee. Linda glanced at me briefly. Something in her expression suggested confusion. Perhaps Emily had told her this was still my home. Perhaps she assumed ownership had passed through an ordinary family transaction. She returned to Emily. When did title transfer recently? How recently? A few weeks ago. Linda nodded slowly. Was it a purchase? No, family transfer. Brian added. Everything was recorded properly. Linda's eyes moved to him. I'm sure we can verify that. Brian leaned back. The confidence in his face slipped a fraction. Linda reached for her portfolio. I'll need a copy of the recorded deed. Emily was prepared. Of course. She opened her handbag and removed a folder. Watching her do it made my stomach turn. She carried the deed casually. The document that had kept me awake at night was just another piece of paperwork in her purse. Linda accepted it. I'll also need any documents related to how the transfer was completed. Emily hesitated. What do you mean if this was part of an estate plan, trust transfer, power of attorney transaction, anything like that? I'll need supporting documents for the title company. Brian spoke quickly. We have power of attorney. Linda stopped. For whom? Emily had power of attorney for Sandra. Had. Interesting choice of word. Linda looked at the deed, then at me, then back at Emily. You used the power of attorney to complete the transfer. Emily nodded. Yes. Linda's professional smile faded slightly. Not dramatically, but I saw it. She lowered her eyes to the deed. Her finger moved along the signature line. I knew exactly what she had found. Emily Carter, attorney-in-fact for Sandra Anderson. Linda read the page again, then turned to the next page. Emily crossed her arms. Brian cleared his throat. What is it? Linda did not answer. She opened her portfolio and removed a pair of reading glasses. She put them on. Then she read the deed a third time. The silence became uncomfortable. Emily finally asked, Is there a problem? Linda looked up. Do you have the full power of attorney with you? Emily glanced at Brian. I can get it. I'll need to see it. Brian gave a short laugh. It's a standard POA, Linda. The county already recorded the deed. Linda's expression remained calm. Recording and authority are not necessarily the same question. My heart began pounding. Those were almost the exact words Robert had used. Brian shifted in his chair. Emily tried to sound casual. I don't understand why this is an issue. I was authorized to handle Mom's property. Linda looked at her carefully. Possibly. Possibly. One word. That was all it took. For the first time since entering my house, Emily looked uncertain. Linda placed the deed flat on the table. Then she pointed to the line showing that Emily had signed on my behalf. Her eyes moved from the document to my daughter. I knew what was coming, and judging by the sudden color draining from Emily's face, some part of her did too. Linda folded her hands. I need to ask you something before I take this listing any further. The kitchen became so quiet, I could hear the old wall clock ticking above the doorway. Brian stopped moving. Emily stared at Linda, and I sat across from them saying nothing. I had waited weeks for someone other than me or Robert to look at that deed carefully. Now the moment had finally arrived. Linda took a breath. Then she asked the question my daughter had never prepared herself to answer. Linda kept one finger on the deed. Her voice was calm when she asked the question. That calmness made it hit even harder. Where is the separate authorization allowing you to transfer your mother's property to yourself? Emily blinked. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then she gave a short, confused laugh. I'm sorry, Linda did not repeat herself immediately. She turned the deed so Emily could see the signature block. This transfer was signed by you as attorney-in-fact for Sandra Anderson. Yes, which means you are acting under the authority granted to you by Sandra's power of attorney. Right. Linda nodded. Then I need to see the language authorizing a transfer that benefits you personally. Emily's confidence disappeared so quickly I almost felt the room change temperature. Brian leaned forward. She had power of attorney. Linda looked at him. I understand. So, what's the problem? The existence of a power of attorney does not automatically answer the question I just asked. Brian frowned. The deed was recorded. Yes. The county accepted it. Yes. So, it's valid. Linda paused. I didn't say that. Brian stared at her. I said nothing. Inside my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For weeks, I had imagined confronting Emily myself. I had imagined throwing the deed onto the kitchen table and demanding to know why she had betrayed me. Instead, I was watching a professional stranger ask the exact question Robert had prepared me for. And Emily had no answer. She reached for the folder. There must be something in here. Linda sat back. Then let's find it. Emily began flipping through pages, too fast. She was no longer reading. She was searching for something she hoped might magically appear. Brian looked over her shoulder. Isn't the POA enough? Linda answered without raising her voice. That depends on what the document says. It gives her authority over Sandra's financial affairs. That is not necessarily the same as giving her authority to transfer Sandra's house to herself. Brian's jaw tightened. This is getting ridiculous. Linda looked directly at him. No, it's getting careful. I nearly smiled then. Nearly. Emily kept turning pages. Her hands were beginning to shake. Finally, she found a copy of the power of attorney. This is it. Linda took the document. I recognized it immediately. The same document Robert and I had reviewed. The same pages William had insisted be written carefully. Linda put on her reading glasses again. She began reading. Nobody spoke. The clock on my kitchen wall ticked steadily. Emily crossed one leg over the other, then uncrossed it. Brian stood and walked toward the window. I stayed exactly where I was. Linda reached the section involving gifts and transfers. She slowed down, then stopped. Her eyes moved back over the paragraph. Emily noticed. What Linda looked up. This appears to restrict self-dealing unless there is additional written authority. Emily stared at her. I don't know what that means. Brian turned from the window. It means nothing. Sandra wanted Emily to handle things. Linda's expression hardened. What Sandra wanted is exactly what the document is supposed to establish. I looked at Brian. He did not meet my eyes. Emily leaned toward Linda. My mother gave me power of attorney because she trusted me. There it was, the word that had been used against me from the beginning. Trust. Linda nodded. I'm not questioning whether she trusted you. Then why are you making this complicated? Because a title company will ask the same question. Why? Because you transferred property from the person you represented to yourself. Emily's face flushed. It's my mother. Linda replied quietly. That doesn't remove the conflict. Brian came back to the table. Can't we just list the house and let the title company deal with this later? No. His expression darkened. Why not? Because I'm not putting a property on the market when there is an unresolved question about the seller's authority. Emily looked increasingly desperate. There is no unresolved question. I own the house. Linda tapped the deed. You are listed as the current record owner. Emily seized on that. Exactly. But the way title was transferred matters. Brian groaned. This is paperwork. Linda looked at him. Yes, real estate transactions tend to involve paperwork. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Emily turned the power of attorney toward herself and began searching again. There has to be another page. Linda asked. Was there a separate authorization? I don't remember. Was there an amendment? I said I don't remember. A gifting rider? I don't know. Linda's gaze remained steady. If one exists, I'll need it. Emily looked at me. That was the moment. Until then, she had been treating this like a technical problem. Something she could talk around. Something Brian could pressure Linda through. Then her eyes met mine, and I think she finally noticed how calm I was. I was not confused. I was not frightened. I was not asking Linda what any of this meant. I was simply watching. Emily went still. Mom. I held her gaze. Yes, her voice became softer. Do you know what she's talking about? Brian turned sharply toward me. Linda said nothing. I could have lied. I could have pretended ignorance for another few minutes. But Robert had told me there would come a moment when silence stopped being useful. I knew this was it. I reached down beside my chair. My handbag had been sitting there the entire time. Inside it was a clean, complete copy of the power of attorney Robert had given me. I placed the bag on the table. Emily watched every movement. Then I took out the document. Brian's face changed. You brought that? Yes. Emily stared at me. Why I did not answer her. I handed the document to Linda. This is the complete copy. Linda accepted it. Thank you. Emily looked from the document to me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You already had this, yes. How long I felt something inside me settle. Weeks of fear. Weeks of pretending. Weeks of listening to my own daughter plan the sale of my home while treating me as if I were too old to understand what was happening. It all narrowed into that moment. Linda opened the document. She compared the pages. Then she returned to the section Robert had shown me. There's the restriction. Emily swallowed. Brian stepped closer. What restriction? Linda pointed. Any transfer that benefits the agent personally requires specific authority beyond these general powers. Brian looked at Emily. Do you have it? Emily did not answer. Emily, I thought... You thought what? She turned on him. I thought the POA covered it. His face became pale. You told me it did. I said, I thought it did. No. You said you handled it. I watched them begin to fracture right in front of me. The plan that had required both of them to remain united was collapsing because of one paragraph William had insisted on years earlier. Linda raised one hand. I'm not here to referee a family disagreement. Brian snapped. This isn't a family disagreement. No, Linda said. It's a title issue. That silenced him. Then Linda looked at Emily again. Do you have a separate document signed by Sandra specifically authorizing you to transfer this property to yourself? Emily stared at the table. No. The word was almost inaudible. Linda leaned slightly forward. I need you to say that clearly. Emily's eyes filled with anger. Not tears. Anger. No. I don't have one. I looked at my daughter. There it was. The truth. At last. She turned toward me. Her voice shook. You knew. It was not a question. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I smiled. Not because I enjoyed humiliating her. Not because seeing my daughter frightened gave me pleasure. I smiled because for weeks she had treated me like an old woman who could be managed, moved, and ignored. And now she finally understood that I had been listening the entire time. Yes, I said. Emily's lips parted. How long? Long enough. Brian stared at me. You set this up? I looked at him. No, Brian. I tapped the power of attorney. William did. The mention of my husband's name changed Emily's face. For a second, she looked almost like the girl she had once been. Then the defensiveness returned. This is insane. Mom, you were going to move eventually. I stared at her. That was never your decision. We were trying to help. You transferred my house to yourself. You weren't using the equity. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Brian closed his eyes. Linda looked away. And I felt the final piece fall into place. Not safety, not concern, not senior living. Equity. Money. I leaned toward Emily. You said you were worried about me. I am. You said this house was too much for me. It is. You said Magnolia Terrace would give me freedom. It would. And yet the first honest thing you've said today is that I wasn't using the equity. Emily's eyes filled with tears now. Mom. No. My voice remained quiet. You don't get to hide behind that word anymore. Linda closed the folder. I cannot take this listing forward. Brian immediately protested. Linda, no. Can't the title company fix it? That is a question for attorneys. Emily's eyes shot back to me. You talked to Robert. I did not deny it. Her face crumpled. That was when she understood the full truth. I had not just discovered what she had done. I had already prepared for what came next. And for the first time since my name disappeared from the deed, Emily was the one sitting in my kitchen, wondering how much control she had left. The answer, though she did not know it yet, was almost none. For several seconds after Linda said she would not take the listing, nobody moved. Emily stared at me as if I had become a stranger in my own kitchen. Brian was the first to break the silence. This is unbelievable. Linda closed her portfolio. No, Brian. This is exactly why title and authority are reviewed before a property goes on the market. He waved toward the deed. But it's recorded. We've already covered that. You're acting like Emily committed some crime. Linda's expression cooled. I'm not making that determination. I'm saying I will not market a property while there is a serious question about whether the transfer was authorized. Emily pushed back from the table. This is ridiculous. I looked at her. Which part? She turned toward me. The whole thing. The part where you transferred my house into your name. Her eyes flashed. I was trying to simplify things. I almost couldn't believe she said it. Simplify things for whom? For you. I let out a soft breath. By removing me from my own deed, you were going to move eventually. There it is again. What that word? Eventually. As if something you imagine happening later gives you permission to do it now. Emily stood. I knew you'd fight me on everything. You never asked, because you refused to be reasonable. I felt something harden inside me. Then answer one question. She crossed her arms. If you truly believed I would agree, why didn't you ask me? That stopped her. Linda looked down at the papers. Brian looked toward the window. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. I waited. You knew I would say no, I said. Her voice dropped. I knew you wouldn't understand. No. You knew I would understand perfectly. You just didn't like my answer. Brian suddenly turned back toward us. This isn't helping. Emily snapped. Stay out of it. His eyebrows shot up. Stay out of it. I'm the one who told you to make sure the paperwork was solid. Emily stared at him. My stomach tightened. There it was, the first crack. Brian continued. You told me the POA covered everything. You pushed me to move fast. I pushed you to deal with the situation. My mother is not a situation. The irony almost made me laugh. I did not. Brian pointed toward the deed. You handled the transfer. Because you kept saying we were running out of time. Linda quietly gathered her papers. I think this conversation has moved beyond my role, but no one paid much attention. The careful story Emily and Brian had presented for weeks was unraveling. I looked at my daughter. What time were you running out of? Emily's face went pale. Brian answered before she could. It's private. I stared at him. You planned to sell my house. It stopped being private when you made my property part of it. Emily sat down again. For the first time that day, she looked tired instead of angry. Brian had 2 investments go bad. Brian's head snapped toward her. Emily. No. She already knows enough. I know almost nothing I said, except that apparently my house was supposed to fix whatever you broke. Brian's jaw tightened. One rental property needed more renovation than expected. Emily gave a bitter laugh. One. He glared at her. She ignored him. The first property sat empty for months. The second one had financing we thought we could refinance. We were going to refinance, but we couldn't. Brian looked furious. I looked at Emily. What else? She rubbed both hands over her face. Credit cards. How much, Mom? How much? I don't know the exact total. Brian muttered. That's not relevant. I turned toward him. It became relevant when you started measuring my bedrooms. He looked away. Emily continued more quietly. We also have a bridge loan coming due, before June. Her eyes lifted to mine. That was confirmation enough. I leaned back. So that was the deadline. Not my health, not hurricane season, not some sudden concern about me living alone. Debt. Linda stood. I'm sorry your family is going through this, but I need to be clear. I am not proceeding with this listing. Brian looked at her. Can you recommend someone who will? Linda stared at him. No. His face hardened. You're walking away from an easy commission. I'm walking away from a transaction I'm not comfortable touching until the legal issues are resolved. She looked at me. Sandra, I'm sorry. I was not aware there was a dispute over the transfer when I came here. I know. And I did. Nothing about Linda's behavior suggested she had entered my home intending to help Emily take it. She had been the first outsider to ask the question that mattered. Emily looked up sharply. You're taking her side. Linda remained calm. I'm taking the side of not putting a disputed property on the market. Then she picked up her portfolio. I'll let all of you handle the rest with your attorneys. I walked her to the front door. Before leaving, she paused. Please make sure you get independent legal advice. I already have. Her eyes flickered with understanding. Good. Then she left. When I returned to the kitchen, Brian was pacing. Emily sat with both hands pressed to her forehead. You talked to Robert behind my back, she said. I stopped. You transferred my house behind mine. That's different. I almost admired the audacity. How I was trying to prevent a financial disaster. For yourself. For our family. No. I shook my head. Don't call this family. Emily looked wounded. That's cruel. What's cruel is deciding my security is available because your husband made bad investments. Brian stepped forward. You have no idea what happened. You're right, because nobody told me. You just decided I should pay for it. We weren't asking you to pay. I stared at him. You were going to sell my house. The money would still benefit the family. I felt anger rise so fast I had to grip the chair. My husband and I worked for decades to own this house free and clear. Brian said nothing. I went without things to pay it off. William went to work sick because we had bills. We saved. We planned. And now you're standing in my kitchen telling me the money belongs to the family because your investments failed. Emily began crying, quietly at first. Mom, please. I turned toward her. What, we're going to lose everything? The anger in her voice was gone. Now there was fear, real fear. For a moment, I saw my daughter again. Not the woman who had taken my name off a deed. The little girl who used to come to me when something frightened her. That was the dangerous part. My instinct was still to help, even after everything. What does everything mean? I asked. Emily wiped her face. Our savings are almost gone. Brian stopped pacing. We can recover if we get through the next few months. With my money, with access to capital, he corrected. I looked at him. My house is not your capital, Emily whispered. We didn't know what else to do. You could have told me the truth. You would have said no. Yes. She stared at me. I let that answer settle. Yes, Emily, I would have said no, because I am not responsible for rescuing two adults from investment decisions I didn't make. Her crying became harder. So, that's it. What do you mean? You're really going to let your own daughter lose everything? There are sentences that reveal more about a person than an hour of explanation ever could. That was one of them. She still thought my refusal caused her loss. Not Brian's investments, not their debt, not the deception. Me. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said the only thing left to say. You were willing to make your own mother lose her home. Emily went completely still. Brian stopped moving. No one argued, because there was nothing to argue with. I picked up the power of attorney from the table and slid it back into my folder. This conversation is over for today. Emily looked at me. What happens now? Robert handles the deed. Her face changed again. Fear returned. Are you suing me? I don't know yet. Mom. I said I don't know. Brian muttered something under his breath. I turned to him. You should both leave. Emily stared at me as though she expected me to take it back. I didn't. Brian grabbed his keys. Emily slowly stood. At the door, she looked over her shoulder. For 1 second, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said, You don't understand what you're doing to us. I held the door open. No, Emily. My voice was steady. You still don't understand what you did to me. She left. I closed the door behind them. Then I leaned against it and cried harder than I had since William's funeral. Not because I had lost the house. I finally knew I might be able to save that. I cried because I had lost the version of my daughter I had believed existed. But the next morning, Robert called me with news that made everything even worse. Emily had not only been preparing to sell my house, she had already tried to borrow against it. Robert called just after 9 the next morning. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily sitting at my kitchen table saying, You're really going to let your own daughter lose everything, as though I had created their debt, as though the money inside my walls had always belonged to them. When Robert's name appeared on my phone, I answered immediately. Tell me you have good news. He was quiet for half a second. I have important news. My stomach tightened. That doesn't sound like good news. It isn't. I sat down. What happened? I found evidence that Emily has already approached a lender using the property. For a moment, I could not understand what he meant. A lender? Yes. For what? A home equity transaction. I gripped the edge of the table. She tried to mortgage my house. More accurately, she appears to have started the process of obtaining financing against the property after recording the deed. I stood up so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. But the house was paid off. I know. William and I spent years paying it off. I know Sandra, and she was going to put debt back on it. That appears to have been the plan. The room around me went strangely quiet. Selling my home had already felt unforgivable. But this was different. If Emily had sold the house, at least there would have been a clear moment when ownership changed hands. Borrowing against it meant she had intended to turn the equity William and I built over decades into cash while leaving the property burdened with debt. How far did she get? Not all the way. Those 4 words were the first relief I felt. Why not? The title review slowed things down. I closed my eyes. Because of the power of attorney, possibly. I'm still confirming details, but the lender's title process appears to have raised questions before closing. So there's no loan, not yet. Not yet. That's why we're acting today. My chest tightened again. Robert explained that if financing closed and a lien attached to the property, correcting everything could become significantly more complicated. There could be another party involved. More documents, more legal expense, more time. The thought made me sick. How close were they? Close enough that I don't want to take chances. I walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, the oak tree moved gently in the morning breeze. I could almost see William standing beneath it. He had always hated debt. Not all debt, of course. We had once had a mortgage, but to William, paying that mortgage off had represented freedom. The day we made the final payment, he brought home a bottle of champagne, despite the fact neither of us particularly liked champagne. He held up the paid-off statement and said, "Nobody owns 1 square inch of this place but us now." I had laughed. Years later, our daughter had nearly changed that without telling me. "Robert," I said, "stop it. I intend to." "No, I mean all of it." He understood. "I'm preparing a formal revocation of the power of attorney." "Good. We'll also send written notice regarding the disputed deed and put relevant parties on notice that Emily's authority to act for you is revoked. Do whatever you need to do. I also want your permission to move forward with challenging the deed formally if Emily won't cooperate." I looked around my kitchen. Yes. The answer came easier than I expected. Not because I wanted to hurt my daughter, because I had finally understood that protecting myself could no longer depend on whether Emily chose to stop. Robert continued, "I'll prepare the documents today. What should I do?" "Nothing with Emily until I tell you." I almost laughed. She already knows I know. Yes. Which means we assume she may move faster now. That frightened me more than anything else he had said. By noon, Robert had sent the revocation. Not just prepared it, sent it. Emily's authority to act for me was being formally withdrawn. Banks and other relevant parties would no longer be able to assume she still spoke for me. Robert also took steps to challenge the deed and make clear that ownership was disputed. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt as though doors were closing faster than Emily could run through them. At 3:15 that afternoon, my doorbell rang. I looked through the window beside the door. Emily, alone, no Brian. She looked terrible. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Her face was pale, and she was wearing the same gray sweater she had worn the day before. I opened the door but did not step aside immediately. "Can I come in?" she asked. For years, Emily had walked into my house without asking. That simple question struck me. I moved aside. She entered. We went to the kitchen. Neither of us sat at first. Then Emily dropped into a chair. "Robert sent me something." "I know. You revoked the power of attorney." Yes. She looked up. You didn't even talk to me first. I stared at her. You transferred my house without talking to me first. Her eyes filled. I know. Do you? Yes. Because yesterday, you still seemed to think the problem was that I wouldn't give you money. She covered her face. I'm scared, Mom. So was I. I didn't know what else to do. I leaned against the counter. You keep saying that because it's true. No. You had choices. She shook her head. You don't understand what it was like. Then explain it.
She looked at me helplessly. Brian kept saying we were weeks away from everything collapsing. Every time we fixed one problem, another one appeared.
The credit cards, the properties, the loan, and that gave you the right to take my house, no. It was the first time she had answered that question correctly. No, she repeated. It didn't. I waited. She began crying. I didn't think it would go this far. My body went cold. I crossed my arms. How far did you think it was going to go? She wiped her face. I thought we'd get through the immediate problem and then fix things. Fix things. Yes. How? She said nothing. You transferred my property to yourself. I know. You contacted a lender. Her eyes snapped toward me. That was all the confirmation I needed. You know about that, Robert does. Emily looked down. I walked to the table and sat across from her. You tried to borrow against my house. We didn't close anything. That isn't the point. I know. No, Emily, I don't think you do. My voice trembled now. I spent decades paying that mortgage. Your father and I celebrated the day this house became debt-free. You were going to put a lien on it without even telling me. Her shoulders shook. We were desperate, and I was convenient. She looked up. No. Then what was I? My mother. Your mother, whose house you could use. She covered her mouth and cried harder. For a moment, every instinct I had as a parent told me to go around the table and hold her. I didn't. Sometimes love means comfort. Sometimes love means refusing to rescue someone from the emotional weight of what they have done. Emily eventually whispered, I'm sorry. It was the first apology I had heard, but it did not erase anything. I believe you're sorry now, I said. Her face crumpled. That's not enough, is it? No. She nodded slowly. What happens next? Robert is protecting the property. Are you going to take me to court? That depends on what you do. She looked frightened. I hated seeing that. But I was done making decisions based solely on whether my daughter was frightened. I need every document, I said. Every application. Every email involving this house. Everything you signed. She stared at me. Mom, everything. What if Brian doesn't agree? Then Brian can explain himself to Robert. She lowered her eyes. The silence between us felt heavier than anger. Before leaving, Emily stopped at the doorway. I really did think I could fix it afterward. I looked at her. That's the problem. What is... You believed you were allowed to break my life first because you planned to repair it later. She flinched. I did not take the words back. After she left, I called Robert. She knows we found the lender. Good. She says she'll cooperate. We'll see whether her actions match that. Those words stayed with me. Actions, not tears, not apologies, not promises. Actions. The next step would force Emily to choose between protecting the scheme she had built with Brian and helping me undo it. And this time, I was not going to make the choice easy for her. 3 days later, I sat across from my daughter in Robert Hayes's conference room. There was no kitchen table between us this time. No family photographs on the walls. No coffee mugs William had chosen. No familiar rooms where Emily could blur the line between being my daughter and acting as though she had authority over me. There was only a long, polished table, 3 folders, a legal pad, and the truth. Robert sat at the head of the table. Emily sat across from me. Brian had wanted to come. Robert had said no. This meeting is between Sandra, Emily, and counsel, he had told him. Apparently, Brian had not taken that well. Emily looked exhausted. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and she had stopped wearing the polished clothes she usually wore to work. She had arrived in black pants and a simple sweater, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. For a moment, I saw the little girl I used to drive to school. Then I reminded myself why we were there. Robert opened the first folder. Emily Sandra has made a decision about how she wants to proceed. Emily looked at me. I spoke before Robert could continue. I don't want to destroy you. Her eyes filled immediately. Mom. But I'm not going to pretend this was a misunderstanding. She lowered her gaze. I continued. You transferred my house into your name without my permission. You prepared to sell it. You tried to use it for financing. And you lied to me when I gave you an opportunity to tell me the truth. I know. Do you? Yes. Her voice was small. Robert slid a document toward her. This is a proposed corrective deed. Emily looked down. If you cooperate, the purpose is to restore title to Sandra and correct the transfer you executed under the power of attorney. She did not touch the paper. What happens if I don't sign? Robert did not hesitate. Then Sandra has authorized me to proceed with litigation, challenging the deed, and seeking whatever relief is appropriate. Emily looked at me sharply. You would sue me. I held her gaze. If you force me to. She leaned back as if I had slapped her. I'm your daughter. And I'm your mother. That's exactly why I can't believe you'd take me to court. A strange calm came over me. For weeks, that sentence would have made me question myself. Now I heard what was hidden inside it. Family was still being used as a shield. Emily being my daughter didn't stop you from taking the house. She looked away. I continued. So being your mother cannot mean I'm required to let you keep it. Robert remained silent. This was not a legal argument anymore. It was something I needed my daughter to hear from me. Emily wiped beneath one eye. Brian says you're overreacting. I almost smiled. Of course he does. He says the deed can be fixed without making this into some huge legal war. It can. She looked at me hopefully. Then why are we doing all this? Because fixing the deed is only one part of it. Robert opened another folder. The power of attorney has already been revoked. Emily nodded. I received that. You will also provide all documents and communications connected to the property transfer, any attempted financing, and any proposed sale. Her expression tightened. Everything? Yes. What exactly do you mean by communications? Emails, applications, lender, correspondence documents, you signed documents, Brian signed, if they involved Sandra's property and any material related to the transfer. Emily looked toward me. You want to go through my private emails? I want to know what was done with my house. That's not the same thing. It became the same thing when you used my property in those conversations. She looked down. Robert continued. You will also acknowledge that you no longer have authority to act for Sandra financially. I understand that. And you will cooperate with whatever additional documents are necessary to clear title. Emily finally reached for the corrective deed. Her hand rested on it. Then she said, You've already decided you don't trust me. My chest tightened. Yes. Her face crumpled. The truth hurt both of us, but I would not lie just to make it easier. I trusted you completely, I said. That's why you had the power of attorney. I made a mistake. No. Emily looked up. I kept my voice gentle. You made several decisions. She started crying. I hated it. I hated every second of watching my daughter cry. But there is a difference between cruelty and refusing to hide consequences. You decided not to ask me for money, I continued. You decided to use the power of attorney. You decided to sign the deed. You decided to approach a lender. And when I asked whether there was something you needed to tell me, you decided to lie. Emily covered her face. I was scared. I believe you. I thought we were going to lose everything. I believe that too. She lowered her hands. Then can't you understand why I panicked? I understand panic. I leaned forward. But understanding why you did something doesn't make what you did acceptable. For a while, nobody spoke. Then Emily whispered, Brian thinks I shouldn't sign. That did not surprise me. What does Brian want you to do? He says we should get our own lawyer. You have every right to. He thinks we can argue that I was acting in your best interest. I stared at her. Do you believe that? She did not answer. Emily, her eyes moved to mine. Do you honestly believe transferring my paid-off house into your name so you could use the equity for your debts was in my best interest? Her lips trembled. No. That word mattered, not because it repaired anything, because it was finally honest. He keeps saying, if we give up the house, we're finished, she said. There is no give up the house. It was never yours. She nodded slowly. I know. Her phone buzzed on the table. Brian. His name lit the screen. Emily stared at it. The phone stopped. Seconds later, it rang again. Robert looked away politely. Emily picked it up. I need to answer. She stepped into the hallway. Through the glass wall, I could see her speaking rapidly. At one point, she shook her head. Then Brian's voice became loud enough that I could hear the tone, though not the words. Emily closed her eyes. When she came back into the room, something in her had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. What did he say? I asked. She sat down. He said, if I sign, I'm choosing you over my marriage. I felt a deep sadness. And what do you think? Emily looked at the corrective deed. For the last 6 months, every conversation has been about money. She rubbed her forehead. If I cried because I was scared, Brian talked about numbers. If I said I didn't want to pressure you, he said, we didn't have a choice. When Linda asked that question, the first thing he cared about was whether the listing could still happen. She swallowed. And just now he didn't ask if I was okay. I said nothing. He asked if I had signed. The room became very quiet. Emily picked up the pen. Then she looked at me. If I do this, does it mean you forgive me? No. The honesty surprised her. It means you're doing the first thing necessary to correct what you did. Will you ever forgive me? I don't know. Her eyes filled again. But I still love you. That broke something open in both of us. Emily cried. So did I. For a moment, I wanted to cross the room and hold her, but the papers were still between us. And those papers mattered. Love had gotten us into trouble because Emily had mistaken it for permission. Now love needed boundaries. Emily took a breath. Then she signed. The corrective deed first, then the acknowledgement of the revoked power of attorney, then the agreement to provide the remaining records. Each signature seemed to cost her something. When she finished, she placed the pen down. Robert reviewed the documents. Thank you, Emily. She gave a hollow laugh. I don't feel like I did anything worth thanking. I looked at her. You told the truth with your actions today. She met my eyes. It's a start. Not forgiveness, not restoration. A start. As we walked out of Robert's office, Emily stopped beside me in the parking lot. Brian is going to be furious. That's between you and Brian. She nodded. I know. I opened my car door. Then she said, Mom. I looked back. I'm sorry I told you that you were choosing a house over me. I waited. She continued. You weren't. No, you were choosing yourself. For the first time in months, my daughter understood something without me having to explain it. I gave her a small nod. Yes. That afternoon, Robert began the process of restoring the title. And for the first time since I opened that terrible envelope, the question was no longer whether I would get my house back. I would. The harder question was what I would do with the daughter who had almost taken it from me. The day my name appeared on the property record again, I did not celebrate the way I thought I would. There was no champagne, no triumphant phone call, no moment where I stood in the living room feeling as though I had defeated someone. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a printed copy of the corrected county record in front of me and ran my finger over two simple words. Sandra Anderson. My name. Back where it belonged. Robert had called me earlier that morning. It's done, he said. The corrective deed has been recorded, yes, and Emily's name, the title, has been corrected. You are the owner of record again. I closed my eyes. For several seconds, I could not speak. Sandra, I'm here. You're all right. Yes. But my voice broke. I looked around the kitchen. Nothing physically had changed. The same clock hung above the doorway. The same sunlight came through the window. The same oak tree stood beyond the backyard. Yet for weeks, every room had felt uncertain. Now the uncertainty was gone. The house was mine again. But Robert and I both understood that restoring the deed was only part of protecting my future. The power of attorney had already been revoked, but Robert wanted to review everything else. My will, my beneficiary designations, my bank accounts, my emergency contacts, every place where Emily's name might still give her access or authority. Sitting in Robert's office, a week later, I felt embarrassed by how many things I had allowed to depend on my daughter. She was my only child, I said. Robert nodded. That's a very common reason. I thought naming family was the safest choice. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. He gave me a sympathetic look. Sometimes relationships change. Sometimes circumstances do. That phrase reminded me of William. Circumstances change. He had understood that better than I had. Robert helped me restructure my plans. I removed Emily as my financial agent completely. Not temporarily, completely. For certain financial matters, I arranged for a professional fiduciary to step in if I became unable to act for myself. Emily would still be contacted in a medical emergency. She was still my daughter. But she would no longer have unilateral control over my property or money. That distinction mattered. Love did not require access. Family did not require financial authority. For the first time in my life, I truly understood that. I also changed the locks. That decision surprised even me. Emily had returned her key after the meeting at Robert's office. She had placed it in my hand without argument, but the old lock still bothered me. Maybe that sounds foolish. It was not about believing Emily would sneak into my home. It was about what the lock represented. For years, my daughter had walked through that door without knocking. After William died, I had encouraged it. This is always your home, I used to tell her. I still loved her, but I no longer wanted anyone believing that loving me meant unlimited access to my space. So I called a locksmith. A young man named Trevor arrived on a Thursday morning. As he replaced the front lock, he asked casually, "Lose a key?" I looked toward the family photographs on the hallway wall. Something like that. When he finished, he handed me 2 new keys. I held them in my palm for a long time. It felt almost ridiculous that such small pieces of metal could mean so much. That evening, I locked the front door. Then I stood inside the house. Safe. Not isolated. Not abandoned. Safe. Meanwhile, Emily's life was changing too. She did what she had agreed to do. She gave Robert the remaining documents. She turned over emails connected to the attempted financing. She answered questions. There were no magical excuses hidden in those records. The story was exactly as painful as I already knew. Brian and Emily had become desperate. Brian had pushed. Emily had agreed. And once they crossed the first line crossing, the next became easier. A conversation about borrowing money became a conversation about my equity. A conversation about my equity became a plan to move me. And a plan to move me became a deed signed without my consent. That was how betrayals sometimes happened. Not in one giant leap, one smaller justification at a time. Emily and Brian separated about 6 weeks later. Emily called me the evening it happened. "I moved out," she said. I sat down. "Are you safe?" "Yes." That was the first question I asked, not because I had forgiven her, because I was still her mother. She was staying with a friend temporarily. Brian had become increasingly angry after the house was taken out of their financial plans. According to Emily, every argument returned to money. "He says, I ruined our last chance," she told me. "What do you think?" There was a long silence. "I think our last chance should never have been your house." That was the kind of sentence I needed to hear. Not "I'm sorry," not "I love you." Recognition, responsibility. Still, I did not offer to pay her debts. I did not invite her to move back into my house, and I did not write a check to make her problems disappear. That was harder than people might imagine. Mothers are trained by decades of habit to rescue. A scraped knee, fix it. A broken heart, comfort it. College shortfall, find the money. Trouble at work, listen until midnight. But Emily was 41 years old. If I paid off the consequences of what she and Brian had done, I would only teach her that my boundaries disappeared whenever she suffered enough. So, when she told me she might have to sell her car and downgrade to something cheaper, I said, "That sounds sensible." When she said she had begun meeting with a debt counselor, I said, "Good." When she admitted she might have to give up things she had spent years working for, I said, "I'm sorry you're going through that." I did not say, "How much do you need?" Those 6 words became part of my healing. For years, I had confused helping with solving. They were not the same. Emily needed to solve her own financial life. I needed to rebuild mine. So I began changing the house. Nothing dramatic. At first, I replaced the cushions on the porch chairs. Then I repainted the guest bedroom. I moved furniture that William had insisted could only go one way. I could almost hear him protesting. The biggest change came when I stood in the doorway of his old home office. For 3 years after his death, I had barely touched it. His desk remained against the wall. A few old pens were still in the drawer. His manuals and notebooks filled the shelves. I had preserved the room because changing it felt like losing him again. But after nearly losing the entire house, something changed in me. I realized memories did not need untouched rooms. William was not living in the arrangement of furniture. So I turned his office into a reading room. I kept his favorite chair. I kept 2 photographs. I kept the wooden box where he stored receipts for everything. But I donated most of the old paperwork and moved the heavy desk out. In its place, I put a comfortable chair near the window and a floor lamp. The first evening I sat there with a novel and a cup of tea, I cried. Then I smiled. The room was no longer only about who I had lost. It was becoming part of the life I still had. I joined a local group for widowed women. At first, I almost did not go. Then I remembered how close I had come to letting other people decide what my future should look like. So I went. We had coffee. We laughed. We talked about grief-grown children, retirement, bad knees, second chances, and the strange experience of becoming responsible for yourself again after decades of marriage. My life began getting larger, not smaller, and Emily noticed. Our conversations remained careful. She did not come over without calling. She stopped offering opinions about my finances. She stopped saying our house. Months passed. Trust did not return, but hostility began to fade. One evening, I stood beneath the oak tree William had planted and looked back at the house. For so long, I had believed justice would mean seeing Emily punished. I was wrong. Justice was standing there in my own yard, holding my own key, knowing nobody else had the right to decide when I should leave. The house was mine again. More importantly, so was my life. And 8 months after that terrible deed arrived, Emily came to my front door and did something she had almost never done before. She knocked. 8 months after my name returned to the deed, I was sitting in my new reading room when someone knocked on the front door. Not rang the bell. Knocked. 3 gentle taps. I put down my book and listened. For years, Emily had rarely knocked. When she was younger, she had used her key. After William died, I had told her she never needed permission to come inside. "This will always be your home," I used to say. I had meant it as love. Somewhere along the way, Emily had begun hearing it as ownership. I walked to the front door and looked through the glass. She stood on the porch alone. No Brian, no folder, no brochures, no papers waiting for my signature. Just Emily. I opened the door. "Hi, Mom." "Hi." She gave me a nervous smile. "Is this a bad time?" That question mattered almost as much as the knock. "No. Come in." She stepped inside and waited while I closed the door. 8 months earlier, I would never have noticed something so small. Now I noticed everything. She did not walk straight into the kitchen. She did not put her purse on my table. She did not start telling me what needed to be done. She waited for me. "Coffee?" I asked. "I'd like that." We sat at the same kitchen table where Linda Matthews had asked the question that stopped the sale. I sometimes wondered whether Emily thought about that day whenever she sat there. I certainly did. But the kitchen no longer felt haunted by it. I had reclaimed more than the deed. I had reclaimed the room, the house, my routines, my future. Emily looked around. "You changed the curtains." "I did. They're nice. Thank you. And Dad's office, a reading room now." She smiled slightly. He'd complain. He would. He'd say his desk was perfectly good. He kept receipts from 1997 in that desk. Emily laughed. I did too. For a few seconds, we were simply mother and daughter again. Then the laughter faded. Emily wrapped both hands around her coffee. She looked different from the woman who had sat across from me 8 months earlier. Not older exactly, less polished, more grounded. She had moved into a small apartment after separating from Brian. She had sold her expensive SUV and bought a used sedan. She was working with a debt counselor and making monthly payments on balances she once believed my house would erase. Her marriage had not officially ended yet, but she and Brian remained apart. I never pushed her for details. That was her life to manage. Just as mine was mine. "How are things?" I asked. "Better." "At work, busy. And the apartment small." I smiled. "You used to tell me smaller was easier." She went. "I deserve that. I wasn't trying to punish you." "I know. That too was progress." There was a time when every boundary I set became proof in Emily's mind that I was angry or vindictive. Now she seemed to understand that not every uncomfortable truth was an attack. She stared into her coffee. I met with the debt counselor again yesterday. How did it go? I'm finally at the point where the numbers don't make me want to throw up. That sounds like progress. It is. She hesitated. I should have done it months before any of this happened. I did not rescue her from the sentence. Yes. She nodded. I kept thinking there had to be one big solution. The house. Her eyes lowered. The house. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she said, Brian always talked about solving everything at once. Sell something, refinance something, find another deal. And you believed him. I wanted to. There was no blame in her tone. That mattered. She continued. I think I believed him because admitting we were in trouble would have meant admitting we had made bad decisions. I understood that more than she probably realized. People sometimes did terrible things, not because they could not see the truth, but because accepting the truth would require them to change. Emily looked at me. I'm sorry, Mom. I had heard those words before. This time, she did not follow them with an explanation. No but. No mention of Brian. No reminder that she had been scared. Just an apology. I know, I said. She swallowed. Then she looked toward the living room doorway. Can I ask you something? Of course. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of her coffee mug. For a woman who had once made decisions about my house without consulting me, she suddenly seemed terrified to ask one question. Finally, she looked up. Do you think you'll ever trust me again? I had known that question might come someday. Still hearing it hurt. I loved my daughter. That had never stopped. Even in the worst moments when I saw her name on my deed and learned about the lender, love had remained. That was almost what made the betrayal unbearable. If a stranger had done those things, I would have felt anger. Because Emily did them, I felt grief. I reached across the table, but I did not immediately take her hand. I can love you before I trust you. Her eyes filled with tears. I continued. Those are not the same thing. She nodded. I know. Trust doesn't come back because you apologize once. It doesn't come back because 8 months have passed. I understand. It comes back one honest choice at a time. A tear rolled down her cheek. I reached across then and took her hand. One honest choice, I repeated. She squeezed my fingers. I'm trying. I can see that. That was as much as I could promise. And for once, Emily did not ask for more. She did not say, but I'm your daughter. She did not tell me I should forgive faster. She did not ask whether I would put her back into my estate documents or give her another key. She simply accepted the boundary. After coffee, I showed her the reading room. She stood in the doorway and smiled. You kept Dad's chair. Of course. William's old brown chair sat beside the window beneath a reading lamp. Emily ran her hand across the back. I miss him. So do I. She looked at one of his photographs. Do you think he'd hate me for what I did? I took a long breath. No. She turned toward me. I think he'd be deeply disappointed. She lowered her eyes. But your father understood that people can make terrible choices without becoming terrible people forever. Emily cried quietly. I put my arm around her. This time, comforting her did not feel like surrendering myself. That was the difference boundaries had given me. I could hold my daughter without handing her control. I could forgive pieces of the past without pretending they had never happened. I could love her and still keep my own key. Later, we walked into the backyard. The oak tree William had planted when Emily was 9 cast a wide shadow over the grass. She looked up into its branches. Dad was right about what it got huge. I smiled. He'd be unbearable about it. Emily laughed. Then she became quiet. I used to think this house was just sitting here. What do you mean, money doing nothing? I looked at her. She shook her head. That sounds awful now. It sounded awful then, too. She gave me a guilty smile. I know. I touched the rough bark of the oak tree. This house was never doing nothing. Emily looked around. For the first time in a very long time, I believed she understood. When she left that evening, she stopped at the front door. Thank you for letting me come over. You're welcome. She stepped onto the porch, then turned back. I'll call before I come next time. I smiled. I'd appreciate that. She walked toward her car. I closed the door gently behind her. 8 months earlier, I had believed getting my name back on the deed would be the end of the story. It wasn't. The real victory was learning that I could protect myself without becoming bitter. I did not lose my daughter, but I also stopped believing I had to lose pieces of myself in order to keep her. William's safeguard saved my house. The rest, I had to save on my own. And standing there in the home that still carried 34 years of memories, I finally understood that my future did not belong to my grief, my age, my daughter, or anyone else. It belonged to me. There is something I learned from all of this that I wish more women heard before they were forced to learn it the painful way. Love and access are not the same thing. You can love your children deeply and still refuse to give them control of your money. You can care about their struggles and still say no when their solution requires sacrificing your security. You can forgive someone without immediately trusting them again. For a long time, I thought boundaries were something people created when they were angry. I was wrong. Sometimes boundaries are what allow love to survive. If I had simply given Emily what she wanted because I was afraid of losing her, I might have lost my home, my financial independence, and eventually my respect for myself. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: getting older does not make your choices less important. At 68, I was still capable of deciding where I wanted to live. I was still capable of managing my own life. I was still entitled to say no. A grown child may worry about a parent. They may offer advice. They may disagree. But concern does not automatically create authority. Emily and I are rebuilding our relationship now. Slowly. Not by pretending the betrayal never happened, but by allowing trust to grow through actions instead of promises. Maybe that is what real forgiveness looks like. Not forgetting. Not surrendering, simply refusing to let one terrible chapter decide how every chapter after it must end. And now I want to hear from you. If you were in my place, could you ever trust Emily again? Or do you believe taking your own mother's home crosses a line that can never fully be repaired? Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you've ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love, you're welcome to share that too. And if stories about family betrayal, dignity, second chances, and finding your own strength speak to you, please subscribe and stay with me for the next one. Sometimes the most important thing we can save isn't a house,